Minister. Obviously, our principals are the leaders of the national primary school system, and like probably other deputies, you've heard of myself. We've heard of a lot of complaints about the increasing workload, the massive workload, in fact, that principals have to undertake, particularly since the 2010, since the crash era. And I'm aware, Hunnig May on Fógra in 0020-2019 release time for principal teachers in primary schools, which I think you issued last week for one additional release date per week for some teaching principals. But I think INTO Trade Union doesn't really feel that's enough to remotely address the additional work that particularly teaching principals have to undertake. Thanks, Curlick.
Gurmaigat Cahirla, Gurmaigat Chaclifania and Kesh, agus Intimalat Major Leshan Brew, Tire na Munchri, agus na Vidya Alegs, na Munscolana, agus Tan Dulgish Orhu, agus na Fragra Orhu Foster, agus Tan Roll Egachru, Egoni, agus Tegam and Five, agus Tegam na Jackrakti Foster. In relation to the issues raised, I have engaged with the relevant stakeholders and I am fully aware of the concerns of school principals. I don't intend to meet with the group in question, as the issues of concern to the group are being addressed by my ongoing engagement with the Primary Education Forum. The Primary Education Forum was established in September 2018 and aims to support the planning and sequencing of change in the primary school sector and to exchange information on the intent and impacts of the actions in the Action Plan for Education, in order to look for synergies and opportunities to streamline implementation and address workload issues. Through adopting this approach, my department and partners have already agreed to make several changes to the pace and sequence of planned reforms. In Budget 2019, school leadership was again supported with an additional release day, as you pointed out, Deputy, for teaching principals in primary schools and a further additional release days for teaching principals in schools with special classes. Building on the level of release days provided in recent budgets is one of my priorities as Minister. Having listened to the IPPN, who brought to my attention the issue of having a second adult present in one teacher's schools during the school day, my department is making available additional resources where gaps are identified to ensure that there are 2 adults present for all of the school day. There is currently no temporary replacement panel to recruit short-term replacement teachers. However, following from the Action Plan for Teacher Supply, my department is currently undertaking an analysis of the potential for a supply panel scheme for primary schools. I understand the pressure that faces principals, especially teaching principals, and I was delighted to meet principals to discuss this issue when I recently spoke at the IPPN conference, working towards making progress and addressing this issue as a priority. And just a final point on that, but I'll get a chance to come back in. Some principals couldn't attend the IPPN because they couldn't get substitute cover, so I'm very, very aware of that very acute problem in teacher supply as well.
As a former teacher, I'll allow you that latitude.
I
understand it fully. Deputy Broughan.
Well, it's disappointing now that you can't meet the National Principals Forum because, as you know, I think you might have a copy of this. They did this major survey entitled "This is how bad things are" of something like 1,200 principals, about 60% of which were teaching principals. And the striking thing is that a shocking 96% said that they were stressed with the level of overwork, and that 2/3 of them felt that work was unsustainable. I think something like 96% of them felt that there was inadequate release time, that was the high challenge and the major challenge, and 2/3 of them again had considered stepping down as principals as a result of the intense pressure of all the additional requirements. And if you're in a principal's office, you'll see the reports and the notices, your Fógras and so on coming in week after week of additional tasks that they have to undertake. So I think the announcement in your recent notice is welcome, but as I said again, INTO was looking for, I think, a day a week for teaching principals in order to address the admin work. I know you did attend the workload forum, Minister, but again, some teaching principals in particular think that you didn't take on board the severity of the workload that they have at present. Thanks, Gerlach.
The messages, and I'm getting them individually from that group that you mentioned, and the messages are quite consistent in terms of initiative overload, the extra pressures, and that's why we put in the whole middle management leadership again into the system, both in primary and secondary, to provide those middle-ranging leadership posts as well. Because the reality is, people in leadership positions in the public domain, public leadership positions, it's proving more and more to be a difficult space because I suppose there's a feeling of being judged, there's a feeling of being in the constant 24 or 7-day-a-week cycle of work, and the old regime of 9 to 5 or 9 to 3 or 9 to 4 in the secondary school system and the old regime of Monday to Friday, that doesn't happen anymore. And I know principals are taking calls on a Sunday, they're taking calls in July, they're taking calls in August, and it's about trying to make that easier. And that one example, just to give an example of how I'm trying to make that easier, they've to become a construction expert as well if they've got a summer work programme. So in a few weeks' time, I'm opening the summer works programme for summer 2020 to give them the time, to allow them the time, rather than rushing towards with the pressure of a few months. The mathematics curriculum change, I've paused that. I've also looked at introducing sequencing into the Admissions to Schools Bill or Act. So there's ways where we can take the pressure off them, and I'm in that space, and I do hear the concerns from those individuals, but I have great confidence and faith in the primary forum. It's a great example where we do the sounding, do the checking, do the testing of different initiatives or different things that are coming down the track, and that primary forum is an excellent forum to do that.
And finally,
well, again, I would ask you to reconsider, Minister, and to meet the National Principals Forum and just to see the up-to-date research that they have in relation to the workload, especially the 75% of teaching principals. You mentioned, of course, in the circular, obviously, that I think the base school, there can be a cluster of 10 schools in order to share a teacher to allow more administrative release. Well, that's welcome, but I think your predecessor, Deputy Broughan, he talked a lot about restoring the supply panels, but he didn't actually take action, and that again is a huge issue for, I think, principals, both teaching and admin principals, and it's noticeable last year, I think, that the number of retired teachers who are covering substitute needs, it's growing year by year, and isn't that something, an important aspect that we did have, in fact, before the crash era, the substitute, the supply panels, that you would just go ahead and restore them. Thanks, but again, I'd like you to meet the principals. Yeah.
Finally.
Yeah, look, I'm happy to read the research, and principals have a great way of getting in contact with politicians directly, and a number of those principals have been in contact with me directly, and I value their input and certainly be happy to read the research. But to be honest, I feel that the primary forum is the place to do the collaborative work, and I've got great confidence in that mechanism. And just lastly, in relation to the supply panels for substitute teachers, I'm committed to it. I've already raised it publicly, and I'm certainly going to ensure that the officials continue to prioritise that to try to have a mechanism in place in the not too distant future.